Okay, before we get started, I gotta tell you this, it was funny. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were telling me, long and short, they thought they had a mouse in their house, and so we got to talking a little bit about it, and it reminded me there was a time when we lived in Clinton. We had a dozen, it seemed like, but we kind of got to talk about what to do. And so they were asking, and anyway, so I was thinking about it, but here was kind of what happened in our house. It was, I remember I'm kind of walking through, and Jamie comes up, and we're standing in the kitchen. She goes, "Did you see that?" And I didn't. And so I'm like, "What in the world are you talking about?" And about that point, we see this little brown egg go from one piece of decor that's up on the kitchen counter to the other. And I was like, at that point, I was pretty sure I knew what it was. And so I turned around to tell her, and she was nowhere to be found. She wasn't just not in the room, she wasn't in the house. But I remember, so what we did is we had no clue. We never had mice. And so, we called some friends and we're like, "Hey, what would you do?" Because we had a little dog at the time, and we had the kids, and so be careful about what you do and treat. And they were like, "Hey, here's what you need to do. You just need to seal up all the food, close up all the places that they can get in, make sure that you don't have extra, trash that is sitting around, and eventually they'll figure out there's nothing to eat and they'll just leave, or they'll starve to death." And so I was like, "Man, that's great." So no baits, no traps, no nothing else that we had. The problem will just go away on its own. Doesn't work that way, does it?
No.
No, actually, that's... Think about it for a second. If you, today, don't imagine too hard, but if you were to go home today and you were to have a snake or mice or whatever, frogs, you have frogs in your house, what would you do? Would you kind of have this live and let live attitude, or would it be more of a kind of a scorched earth protocol? I'm thinking that's what it is. It's like, no, you're going to stop whatever you're doing as soon as you see it, and it's like, we're getting them out of here. And you're going to do everything you can to get them out of the house. Then you're going to do everything that you can to make sure that every point of entry that they can come in is closed. You're going to make sure that there is absolutely nothing to entice them to come in, even if that means you have to go on a diet for like months. There's not going to be any food that they would want in the house. Well, you want them gone, don't you? That's what you do. And the reason I say that is because that's really what we have been discussing for about the last 5 weeks, okay? Is the fact that, we have these things that we get into our heart, and we need to deal with them. You don't just wait for the problem to take care of itself, okay? And so for that reason, that was why you guys were all introduced to Mr. Mugg, okay? And does everybody remember to say hi to Mr. Mugg? Mr. Mugg is the mascot for our series. And if you're visiting today, you're thinking, mascot for a series? What in the world are you talking about? And here's the reason why. Mr. Mugg is our mascot because, honestly, Mr. Mugg is us. Or maybe it'd be better to say, many times we have all been Mr. Mugg. Okay? And the thing is, see, Mr. Mugg, well, it's important. Mr. Mugg has a problem. Okay? Mr. Mugg has all kinds of stuff inside him. And he has all this stuff, all this junk inside him that he does not like to have anybody else see, that he doesn't ever want to have it come out. And so what Mr. Mugg has done over many years, the years of his life, is that he has developed a complex set of filters that are all designed to keep all of the stuff that's in him down in him and keep it from coming out. But what's the thing that all of us know? Filters fail. Okay? And and so what always happens is that there comes that time where all of a sudden, Mr. Mugg, he's frustrated, or he's really, really tired, and there's a bunch going on, and so all of a sudden he just lets some words loose. Or he goes home and he's having a bad day, and he just lets Mrs. Mugg have it. Or Sippy Mugg. for a little kid. Or he's hanging out with all of his friends, you know, and they're all relaxed, and they're just chilling, and he forgets to check his filter, and all of a sudden, oh, out comes that coarse joke. Or they start talking about one of their friends. Or he's at work, and I'm a glass does something really stupid. And he has to fix it. And it's funny, we sit here, you know, and we love to laugh about it when we're talking about Mr. Mugg as the focus. But we all do the same thing, don't we? We all have the same problem. And that's the reason that we've had Mr. Mugg, is as a reminder of the fact that just as he does, we all have stuff that is deep down inside of us, junk that we want to keep down inside of us. We don't want other people to see it. We don't want it to come spewing out. And so we've developed this complex set of filters to try and keep that stuff down. But the thing is that I hope what you've learned through the course of this series is that's what's called behavior modification. And my point of all of this is what we have been taught all through all of our lives, it's wrong. We have been taught behavior modification, haven't we? We have been told that if you have a language problem, if you say things you shouldn't say, you need to work harder at not saying those words. Or finding alternative words instead of saying those. If you have an anger problem, then what you need to do is learn how to keep it down and not let it get out. But see, that's just behavior modification. That is not addressing the real problem. And what we've learned throughout the course of this series is the fact that Jesus said, and the Bible says it all throughout, is that instead of dealing with the symptoms, which is what we always do, it's what we've been taught to do, we need to deal with the source. And we know that the source is our heart. That's why Solomon, wisest man to ever live, said what? He said, above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. What he knew is what Jesus knows, which is what we need to know and embrace and apply. And that is that out of the overflow of our heart, the mouth speaks. In other words, out of the overflow of our heart, that's what we do. That's how we act. That's how we speak. That's how we respond to people, is that it's coming out of our heart. And so one of the things that we looked at is, and this is why Jesus says you need to clear it out. Not just try to modify the behavior, but we need to get that junk out of our hearts. Because otherwise what happens? It comes spewing out at the most inopportune times. It gets all over the people that we love, that we have the closest relationships with. It ruins those relationships. And it causes all kinds of problems in our life. And so that's why we have been dealing with this. Okay? But I think that there's even something, and we're going to kind of go back, because there's some people that weren't here maybe for all of the series, or maybe your first time here, and so I don't want to just kind of pick up at the end. It's like reading the last 3 pages of the book and expecting you to understand why he died. You know, it doesn't work. It doesn't have nearly the impact. So we're going to kind of go back, and I don't want to, nobody died, by the way. I just want to clarify, I'm getting some somber looks there. Here's one of the reasons this is important, though, is yes, it affects our relationships. Yes, it has an impact on us. But, you know, the thing is, I got to thinking about this. Do you realize that one of the biggest issues that Jesus had with the Pharisees and the religious leaders of his day was what? It was the fact that their outward actions were not reflective of their heart. Okay? He called them what? He called them whitewashed tombs. He said, you look great on the outside, but inside you're full of dead men's bones. He said, you do a great job. You've got all the rituals of washing the outside of the cup and the saucer, but you know what? Deep down inside, you're full of deceit and hypocrisy. He said, you look great. You look righteous to everybody who's around you on the outside, but on the inside, you are full of hypocrisy, of deceit, of manipulation and evil. I mean, all throughout, that was his biggest thing with them. It was the fact that what was inside their heart, they did such a good job of modifying their behavior that they didn't let it be seen, but it didn't change their hearts. And I don't want that. I don't want it for me. I don't want it for you. I don't want it for us. And so that is the reason that we've really been looking here at all of these attitudes, because the fact is that whether we want to admit it or not, eventually the stuff that we carry around inside is going to come out. It's going to manifest itself in one way or another. And that's the reason that we went through the series, that we talked about all of these different attitudes, is because no matter how much we try to compartmentalize our heart, no matter how much we try to kind of keep that over there and this over here, and you never let the two mix and you never let the other one out, the fact is we all know that eventually it all seeps through. And it all ends up impacting other aspects of our life. It ends up getting into places we never ever intended it, and it ends up coming out in times that we never ever wanted it to. And that's what happens, is then our greed just ends up spewing out. Our greed and our jealousy ends up spewing out all over the people that are the closest to us. Our guilt, our shame, our unforgiveness just explodes over people that have absolutely nothing to do with that if we don't deal with it and learn to clear it out. Okay? And so I've said, so we'll kind of go here real quick. I said that we had, when I was talking about the 5 attitudes, I said 4 of them could be expressed as a debt-debtor relationship. Remember saying that? I lied. It feels so good to tell the truth. No, what I figured out is, as I got to thinking about it, honestly, all five of the attitudes, the monsters, the whatever you want to call them, that we have been dealing with really do kind of have that same type of relationship. That probably the best way to understand them is as a debt and a debtor relationship. And the reason I say this is because I think a lot of times we talk about things, whether it's sin, whether it's attitudes, whether it's things we struggle with, and sometimes, I mean, I don't know about you. Have you ever listened to a sermon, and it's great, and you take all kinds of notes, and then you go home, and you're like, but how in the world do I apply that in my life? Anybody ever been there? So I'm the only one? Okay, no, thank goodness. Because I think we've all done it, and so that's one of the reasons I've really wanted you to kind of, and that does kind of hurt, to be honest, that, anyway. No, the problem is that I think a lot of times, we don't really kind of understand it in day-to-day. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to lay this out in kind of that debt-debtor relationship. But what I got to thinking about is even pride has that debt relationship to it. Okay? Think about it. What is pride? Pride is, all said and done, it is an attitude of entitlement. And it says, I am owed. Think about it. Isn't that what pride says? Pride says, I am owed that level of respect. I am owed that privilege. I deserve to be treated. I deserve to receive. It's an attitude that says that everybody else, I am owed that. Okay? And so one of the things that we need to do when it comes to pride, and we talked about this, is the first thing is a dependence upon and an understanding of who God is. I would say God awareness and servanthood are the 2 greatest weapons when it comes to overcoming this attitude of entitlement and pride. And the reason, when I say God awareness, what I mean is that when we begin to understand who God is, what God is, and what He has given us. Because when we put Him in His rightful place as the provider of all things, as the giver of all things, then what we do is we are reminded of the fact that I am nothing, that I accomplish nothing without Him. And so we find our glory and our praise and our honor is of Him and what He has done instead of what we've done. And that begins to break that cycle of pride and entitlement, okay, that we have in us. The other thing we do is an attitude of servanthood. It has been said that we will never look more like Jesus than when we are serving someone else. Plain and simple. And so when we begin to serve others, then that is, pride is, if you want to say it, pride is the absolute anti-Christ attitude. Because that's the exact opposite of who he was. He had every reason to be prideful. He had every reason to feel entitled to say, I am owed, I deserve, I should, but he never did. Instead, he came and served. He humbled himself. And so, never lose sight of the fact. Pride is what made the devil. And that is why it is so dangerous. And it is something that we need to work hard to begin clearing out of our heart. So we talked about pride. The next thing that we dealt with was an attitude of greed. Okay? Greed in that debtor relationship says what? It says, I owe me. I owe me. I need to save, I need to store. The problem is that greed in all of its forms, it assesses the value of our life based upon what we have, what we have amassed, what we have accomplished. Okay? That's what greed is. But the Bible makes it very clear that a man's life does not consist of the abundance of his possessions. And so that's not how we should value our life. It should be based upon the value that we have in the eyes of God. But one of the things we learned is that greed is not a money issue, is it? It's not a wallet issue. Greed is a heart issue. Greed is an issue of the heart because not only do we withhold money, not only do we amass stuff, but we withhold possessions, we withhold our time, we withhold our attention, we withhold our compassion. Okay, we're greedy with those things, and we want to keep them for ourselves. And so, the first step, I think, number one, to eliminating that is, we talked about it, finding ways to be consciously generous. Making the conscious decision, I am going to be generous in this area. I may not feel like it today, but I'm still going to do it. I may not really want to, but God is telling me to. And you find those ways, and that begins to break the hold that greed has on our heart, and it begins to kind of scrape it out of there. It's finding ways to put others and their needs ahead of yours. And that's how you begin to break that cycle. We talked about jealousy. What does jealousy say? Jealousy says God owes me. And I know that was one of you we talked about. I think there's a few people who kind of said, no, what do you mean? If you boil jealousy down to its most basic element, jealousy is your feeling that somehow God cheated you. That somehow God owes you what he gave to other people. That God owes you that kind of body, that kind of wealth, that kind of opportunity, that kind of whatever. Okay? And that's really what jealousy is. The problem is that when it comes to jealousy, instead of talking to God about it, who do we always talk to? We talk to and talk about those people that make us jealous. We look at them and we feel that somehow God cheated us out of the life that they have, yet we treat them horribly because of it. We feel that somehow God owes us that kind of wealth, that kind of body, that kind of whatever it is. And so we get angry. We do the same thing with health. We do it no matter what it is. We look at other people and we wish we had what they have in some area of their life. But when it all comes down to it, God is the one that gives all gifts. God is the one that provides all of that. The person we're upset with is God. We feel that somehow he owes us. And so I told you, I think the first step is that you and I have got to get real and spend some time. That was kind of the real world application, is you need to spend some time to sit down with God and to say, God, I feel like you owe me. I feel like you cheated me when it comes to this. I feel like you owe me when it comes to that. The reason that so-and-so upsets me so much is because I feel like I should have had that life. I should have had that wealth. I should have had that opportunity. And I know when I said that, I think there were probably more than a few that were kind of like, God's going to be ticked at me if I have that conversation. No. I honestly think that that's a conversation he would like to have with a lot of us. Because for the first time, it would be us acknowledging God as who He is, which is the giver of all gifts, the provider of all things. We would be putting Him back in His rightful position as sovereign God. And I think He'd like to hear that, because for the first time, we would be admitting what it is that we struggle with. That somehow we think things ought to be better. And the second step of that then is to begin to celebrate those that bring out jealousy in you. Man, great house, nice car, good job. I mean, that's an outward action that we make there. But the danger with jealousy is, and this is the thing, so many of these things we look at them and we see one side, but I don't think we always continue. The danger with jealousy is that when it is left untouched, okay, when it's left alone, like that mouse in the house, you know what happens? It turns from being jealousy about others into bitterness towards God. And that's why we've got to deal with it. We got to deal with it early, deal with it now, and begin to dredge that stuff out of our heart. The next one was the impact of guilt. Once again, guilt's kind of one of those, debt-debtor relationship. Guilt says, I owe you. I owe you an apology. I got to make it up to you. I did something, and now I owe you because of it. And one of the things about guilt is, if you guys remember, I had Colby come up here, and Colby held a glass of water, okay? And he was holding that glass of water. It wasn't heavy when he picked it up, not at all. But you guys that were here, it took a little bit, and what happened? He started kind of pulling his arm back a little bit closer, and his arm started shaking. Why? Because the glass gets heavier over time. And here's the thing, your guilt gets heavier over time. The longer you carry it, when you carry guilt from one season of life to another, from one relationship to another, what early on was easy, was no problem to carry, the longer you carry it, the heavier and the heavier it gets, and the more of a burden that it becomes on you. And the real problem with guilt is that guilt in itself is bad, and it will eat us apart. It'll eat us up. The real problem is that when guilt turns into shame. See, guilt is what I did. Shame is when it becomes who I am. When what I did turns into who I am. When I made a mistake turns into I am a mistake, or I failed at something turns into I'm a failure. And it's just, that's the natural progression, because we carry it for so long that it begins to become a part of who we are. And the fact is, that's not who you are. That's not what you are. God doesn't make mistakes. He never fails. I think one of the things that is a problem with guilt is the way that it shows up in a lot of us. What's the old saying is, misery loves company. In the same way, people who struggle with guilt are usually the best at manipulating and leveraging guilt to motivate and manipulate others. If I feel guilty, if I feel like I failed, if I feel like, if I can't live up to my own standards, there's no way I'm going to let you live up to my standards either. And so as a result, we carry this guilt, we carry this shame, and it ends up that we just, it's all over everybody that is close to us. Okay? And so once again, it hurts our relationships, but there comes that point too where when shame gets so strong, it becomes so much a part of us that we don't even feel like we're worth saving. We don't even feel like we're worthy of what Jesus did for us. But the fact is that, the first step is we've got to express our guilt to God whenever possible. We've got to express what we're guilty about to those that we've hurt, if we can. Not always is that the right thing to do, but if it is, we need to do it. And then, I think to be able to kind of dredge it out, it's funny how when we expose things, the things that we are so the things that control us so much when they are exposed to the light of day, they're not as powerful as they were. They don't have the same power over us that they always have had. Last week we talked about unforgiveness. Unforgiveness says, you owe me. You did something to me, you owe me. And the thing is, unforgiveness shows up in a myriad of ways, but most of the time it expresses itself in outbursts of anger. You know, the problem though with nursing a grudge is that most of the time we don't have any control over who it explodes on. Okay? You know, we nurse a grudge against somebody over here. The fact is that it's other people over here that end up feeling the brunt of it. Okay? And it happens, you know, in a variety of different ways. You may have issues with forgiving your wife, forgiving your husband, may go back further than that, maybe your kids, maybe somebody at work. But the thing is that who do you take it out on? You take it out on your kids, or you take it out on coworkers, or you take it out on people at church, or whatever. Because, I mean, it's, even though you're upset with somebody else, you don't take it out on them, you take it out on others. And unforgiveness is one of the... Unforgiveness, and there was a reason that Jesus talked about it so many times and was so emphatic about it. Okay? And I said it... Jesus didn't say, forgive as you have been forgiven. It's not part of the Lord's Prayer because it's like a you better. It was in there, you better. Because if you don't, it will eat you alive. It will. You know, we said last week that unforgiveness is like drinking poison and hoping that it's going to kill your enemies. It never, ever happens. Unforgiveness is like that fire that has run out of oxygen, and it sits there and it smolders until all of a sudden the door is opened and there's a fresh batch of air that comes in and it just explodes with new fury. And that's the way unforgiveness is. We forget about it. It sits over in the corner. It quietly smolders until something happens. And now there's that fresh hurt. There's that fresh pain, that fresh injury that happens. And all of a sudden, boom! It blows up. And it sets everything else ablaze. And then it's out of control. And we sit here trying to get it to put out. Which means that the only way to deal with unforgiveness is to completely extinguish the fire. And that only happens when we cancel the debt. That's what we have to do. And I will say this, the greatest motivator for us forgiving others should be the cross of Christ. I mean, if knowing what He forgave me of does not motivate me to be forgiving of others, then I don't understand that, do I? I don't grasp the magnitude of what He did for me. And so that's where, you know, unforgiveness, the first is realizing what Jesus has done for us. I will never earn, I will never be deserving of the forgiveness of God, but I received it through the grace of God. I will never be able to do enough to make up for the price that Jesus had to pay for me. But He did. Because He loved me. And if that does not motivate me to forgive others, then I don't understand the price that was paid. But what I hope you took kind of from this series and from all of it is that I hope you came to understand that what we've been taught forever is wrong. And what I mean is that we have been taught behavior modification. We've been raised that way, haven't we? That if you say a bad word, just work double hard on not saying it again. If you've got issues with anger, then you need to get counseling, you need to get this to try and stop doing that. Okay? But the fact is that behavior modification on its own never works. Does it? I mean, we can try to modify our behavior. We can quit saying those words, and we can put in alternative. We can put in some Christian cuss words, or we can, whatever it is. We can do all of that stuff. But what happens eventually? Eventually, our filter fails. Okay? We can have issues with anger, and we can try to put in filters, and we can modify our behavior so that doesn't show up, so that people don't see it. But eventually, that's going to fail. Because the one thing that's never ever happened is what? We've never dealt with the source of the problem. The only thing that we've ever done. Lavina got on to me the other day. Well, that was a while back, but no, I was hurting, and I had all this congestion going on in my head, and I had a headache going, and I'm like, she says, well, do you need, I don't remember what she had, but something that should deal, with sinus congestion. And I'm like, oh no, I've got some ibuprofen. And she's like, well, there you go. Just treat the symptoms, but don't try to get rid of the congestion. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's kind of stupid, wasn't it? But see, that's what behavior modification does, doesn't it? We deal with the symptoms. We see that as being the problem, and so we try to find a way to eliminate it. We try to find a way to control it, to stop it. But that's not dealing with the source of the problem. And that's the reason that Jesus was so clear about the fact that out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. That's the reason that Solomon tells us that above all things we should do what? Guard our heart. Why? Because it is the wellspring of life. Because everything that we are, everything that we do stems from there. I mean, the fact is that if you're walking along and you see a honey pot and you kick it over, what gets out all over the ground? Honey. The question is, when you are kicked, what ends up everywhere? Because that's what's inside you. That is what you are at your core. And that's what we've got to be aware of. And so, the thing that... Here's the deal, because I know that in the course of this, I've given you real-world applications, haven't I? If you guys have noticed, I've said, here's the problem, and here's what we do, and here's what, and not that this is going to solve the problem, but I said, this is steps that you need to take, okay? And I know that in some ways, that may sound like behavior modification. Because, what I'm saying is, learn to celebrate the people that make you jealous. And you think, well, that's just me saying something I don't really mean. That's just modifying my behavior. It is and it isn't. Because here's the deal. When we focus on behavior modification, the goal is simply to get rid of the symptoms. To just modify the behavior to keep from saying it, doing it, acting that way again. That's all it is. Okay? What we were talking about is putting in behaviors that then begin to change our heart. Because just as Jesus said, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Now, if out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. If what comes out of our mouth, if what shows up in our actions is the result of what is in our heart, then it is a safe principle, and I believe that the Bible teaches it, that we can learn to influence our heart by what we have come out of our mouth, by the actions that we do. It's not going to change everything, and I'm not saying that because you quit cussing that all of a sudden your heart is going to be great. I'm not going to say that if you learn how to control your behavior that all of a sudden that's going to change your heart. No, but it is going to start the process, and that is the reason that I was giving you these applications, because that starts it. But the fact is, that's not the end of it. Okay? Just learning how to congratulate people who bring out jealousy in you, just learning to give away some of your money, just learning to congratulate and to give other people credit is dealing with the symptoms. But the goal of it is to teach you a spiritual lesson as well. And that's where it's not behavior modification on its own, it's about life change. And it is about teaching yourself something. An interesting thing is that if you go and you look at the Old Testament, what do you find in the Old Testament? You find all kinds of, the temple and the tent of meeting were all built in an exact way. Okay? They were built exact standards. There were steps, there were rituals, there were things that they were told to do. Okay? And believe me, I am in no way trying, this is not a goal, to try and elevate what I have told you to the point of being a religion. That's not it. Okay? But here's the deal. When you look back at the Old Testament, what you find is that every one of those rituals, every one of those things that they did, even down to the clothes that the priest wore and the order that things were in the temple, every bit of that was designed with the purpose of teaching the Jews a spiritual lesson through physical actions. They were given visible, physical, tangible things to do which taught them spiritual lessons. You know, the blood of bulls and goats never took away the sins of man. But God had them sacrificing bulls and goats and sheep so that they understood the spiritual truth that the wages of sin is death. Every bit throughout the Old Testament, we find physical actions that they were told to take, which relayed a spiritual message and a spiritual lesson. And so, you know, when we talk about this, and I'm not talking about instituting a religion, the things that I've given you to talk about, that I've given you to do of each of these, and by the way, if you weren't here for all of them, and you want to know, and you're like, hey, that's great, but I wasn't here for pride, or I didn't hear the one about greed, or I didn't hear the one about jealousy, our messages are online, or at the same time, give me a call, and I will be more than happy to get you notes, I will get you thoughts, I will get you anything that you need, okay? I will tell you, I'm just going to say this. I love when people walk out the back door and they say, that was an amazing message, and boy, it really spoke to me, and you stepped on my toes, and whatever, I love it. But you know what? There is nothing that is more powerful to me than to have somebody come up to me 2 or 3 weeks or a month later and say, hey, you know what? A month ago you were preaching on this, and I went home and I applied this, and man, has God been working through it. This is a change I put into my life. This is something I've been doing differently. Okay? And so, if you're talking about these actions and if you missed one and you want to know, please come see me, and I'll be more than happy to give them to you and to relay them to you.